boy.
Lawrence State.
No pressure. All right, we're ready to go, so we'll thank you very much for joining us.
My
Like
pleasure.
I said before, we have a list of about a dozen questions that
Okay.
we went through with your challenger as well, so we'll go through the same list. And then if we have some time, we'll do a little Q&A
Sure.
afterwards, all right?
Absolutely.
So we're just gonna get right to it.
Okay, get right to it.
Let's do it. What makes you more qualified than your opponent?
I don't know my opponent, so
Okay.
I've never met him. I've never seen him. I've lived in this. I was born in our district. I've lived here my whole life. I represented our district for 8 years in the state senate. I've represented our district for 20 years in Congress. I served in combat in Vietnam from our district. My wife is a nurse works in our district. One of my sons is a deputy sheriff that works in my district. One of my granddaughters is a retail employee in my hometown of St. Helena in our district. I come home every weekend that we're in session, and I'm somewhere in our district. Every district work period that we have, the majority of the time I come home. I served for 8 years on the Intelligence Committee, and I used to split the district work periods. One, I would come home to the district. The next one, I would do my foreign travel requirement. So that's a long way of saying that I've been, for all of my years, very closely associated with our district and have never met him, never seen him. So it's hard for me to do a juxtaposition for you, but I can tell you that given the fact that I've taught school, I've worked in the wine industry, served in the military, served in the Senate, served in the Congress, have a small ranch myself, so I understand the plight of both business people and agriculturalists in our district, and I have a long record about my accomplishments in both the Senate and in Congress that I could bore you with forever. I think that sets me apart from anyone who would run against me, and I have a commitment to work for our district 24/7 and a commitment to ensure that the institution of representative government is in good shape for as long as I'm there and long after I leave.
Very good. So then, if you know what's going on in the area, right, you know how challenging it is for students that struggle with debt to live in this area, to go to school in this area. So one question that we wanted to ask was, if re-elected, how would you help college students finance their educations going forward?
That's a great question, and it's not just in our area. You know, we have our congressional district is all or part of 5 counties, and some of the areas have a lower cost of living than others. But if you're in Sonoma or Napa County, it's higher. But if you're in Vallejo or if you're in Lakeport, some of the more affordable places in the district, and you come out of college with a 6-figure debt, which is not uncommon. And I know that I have a lot of young people that work for me, both in one of my 3 district offices or my capital office, and I've got folks that I work with every day that have a 6-figure debt coming out of school, and that makes it hard, no matter where you live, to be able to afford to live. And not only is that a burden on you and your families, but it's also a burden on our community, because part of the benefit of going to school is you come out more marketable. You're worth more. You can make more money. And from a government employee's perspective, someone who is promoting programs that create opportunities, there's a cost with that. And so the more taxpayers, the bigger our taxpayer base, the better off we are. So the more educated population, the more you're going to contribute to not only your betterment, but the betterment of others around you and future generations in the area of creating opportunities. Well, if you come out with a big debt, that you can do, not only is it harder for you to live, but it's harder for you to spend money because you're paying it back back to somebody. So that means you put off purchases, put off purchase of a home, put off the purchase of a car, put off the purchase of a new refrigerator, whatever it might be, and that's all money that multiplies through the community and creates the jobs that we depend on. So there's a lot that we need to do. When Democrats last had the majority, we took that on head first, and we bumped the middle person out of the equation, and we were able to save, I think it was $60 billion when we did that. And we took all of those savings and reinvested those right into the Pell Grant system to make sure that students had an opportunity to get the grants that they needed in order to get finish a higher education. And we need to do more of that. We need to expand the grant system. We need to make sure that these for-profit entities that really benefit in a near predatory fashion are curtailed. And I think I bring a perspective to this job that a lot of my colleagues don't, and I think it's a perspective that helps all of you and students across the district. And if I could just take a minute to explain that. I dropped out of high school. When I was a kid, I liked things about high school, but none of them were the scholastic things. And so let's suffice it to say that after I played my last basketball game in high school, there was no reason for me to stay, in my mind. I thought I knew more than the teachers. I thought I knew more than the parents. I thought I knew more than adults. So I left. Interestingly, I came over to Santa Rosa Junior College because there was a friend of mine was taking some classes here, and I thought I'd try it out. And I wasn't here more than a few days when I realized I knew more than the teachers here too. So next thing I knew, I found myself in the Army. And probably the first 15 minutes that I got off the bus at Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training, I figured I probably miscalculated that teachers and adults probably knew a little bit more than me. So I was in the Army. As I said, I served in Vietnam. I was shot up over there. I got out of while I was in the Army, I got my GED. I got out of the Army, and the first thing I did is I got a job, came home, got a job, and I signed up for classes at Napa Community College. And then I later transferred to what I'm sure you all refer to as the Harvard of the CSU system, Chico State. And everybody calls it that, right? And
no comment.
I finished my my undergraduate degree, and I started graduate school. It bugged me that I'd never finished high school. So I called St. Helena High School, said, what do I need to do to get my high school diploma? And I certainly didn't need to, but it was kind of unfinished business. And they said I need to take an English class, I need to take a science class. So I took a creative writing and a geology class at Butte Community College, right outside of Chico. And I did that concurrently with grad school. So I may be the only person who comes in here for an interview who has a GED, an undergraduate degree, a high school diploma, and a master's degree in that order. So I kind of understand the struggles that folks go through. When I finally went back to college, I was married, we had 2 kids, and that complicates the situation even more. We had to be creative. I'd quit my job. My wife quit her job. We had to be creative. We were one of the founders of a babysitting co-op where we would, with other students, and we would swap babysitting services. I did work. I painted a house. I did yard work. I did whatever I needed to do in order to make ends meet. And it was a lot more affordable at that time than it is now. So I understand the challenges that you go through, and I'm committed to making sure that we focus on making education affordable.
Okay. Is there anything you do in general to improve education?
Well, yeah, I would do the grant stuff.
The grant.
Yeah, that is critically important to make sure that the resources are available for students to be able to attend school.
And we know that the funding formula specifically for community colleges and JCs is changing here in California. And there's some concern that maybe that the changes in that formula will shift more money away from SRJC to community colleges further in the South. Do you care to comment
Well,
on the changes?
you can't do that. One of the things that we fought in this last Congress, and I may have heard from some of you guys about it, but I think I heard from every administrator and every educator in the higher ed system, was this Prosperity Act that was anything but. It should have been the Non-Prosperity Act. It was a Republican bill that they pushed through that would have reconstituted funding for higher education, cut $15 billion out of education. And you can't do that. The priorities of this majority are upside down. These guys push through legislation that give $2.3 trillion tax cut to corporations and to the wealthiest, richest people in the country, and then they turn around and talk about the need to deal with the debt and the deficit, and they want to cut things like education, Social Security, and Medicare. It's absolutely inappropriate.
The president just said he wanted to cut 5% from every
5%
cabinet
from
budget, right?
except the military.
Except the military, right?
And that's what was it Willie Horton? Was he Willie Sutton, the bank robber, the famous bank robber back in the cowboy days? When he was arrested, they asked him. They said, "Well, why do you rob banks?" He said, "Well, that's where the money is." Right. And you want to know where the money is? It's in the education, the defense side of the budget. And know this, I believe we need a strong military, but know this: a big part of national defense appropriations are outside of the defense budget. So it's usually debated in two areas. You have the defense and you have non-defense spending. But part of non-defense spending is Homeland Security. So not only do they get their defense spending side of the ledger, but they dip into the non-defense side of the ledger also.
Double dip, maybe, some would say, potentially. So in talking about national defense, and I think in some ways that ties to Homeland Security, and in some ways the administration ties that to immigration. And we do have some immigration questions for you. Where do you stand on DACA specifically?
I just got done making some remarks over at the new Sonoma Office of Education, North Bay Teachers Teaching Learning Center. And I talked to them about the contributions of teachers and the value of that learning center, because we got about a 300 teacher shortage in Sonoma County, K-12 shortage, and the speaker before me made a point of that, and I told him I wanted to share a couple of other numbers with them. Not that 300 is not significant for our county, but. Does anybody know what the statewide teacher shortage is in California?
Don't know.
7,000. We are 7,000 teachers short today, K-12. Anybody want to guess how many teachers employed in California are DACA recipients?
Oh, that's
5,000. 5,000 DACA recipients are teachers in our schools today. Another almost 5,000 are classified employees. If this guy in the White House got his way and was able to repeal DACA, we would, just for starters, in California, we'd lose 7,000 teachers and 5,000 teachers and almost 5,000 classified employees. DACA recipients are as American as any one of us in this room. They are people who came here as kids. They are people who grew up here. They went to school. They played sports. They went to church. They work with us, with our kids. They're contributors, and they're some amazing individuals. And the least we can do is maintain the DACA status. Now, what we should be doing is comprehensive immigration reform. And the idea that the guy in the White House was trying to tie everything to build a wall is one of the most ridiculous things that any of us have ever heard. And every time there's an issue, he wants to build it a foot higher. And so if you start with his, I don't know what it was, 10-foot wall that he originally wanted to build, that's going to be an economic boom for people who make 11-foot ladders. He's talking about 7th century technology to deal with 21st century issues. It's nonsense. There's no one here that hasn't seen the news coverage of individuals who tunnel underneath the wall. And they start a half a mile from the wall and they tunnel 3 miles under and come up underneath a warehouse someplace. And that just doesn't work. We need to have comprehensive immigration reform. We need to figure out how to maintain our border security in the most efficient way possible, and that's not putting the military down there. There's a lot of great things that can be done, and we can do it all if we are willing to get beyond the politics. And I thought we were really close. I was a co-sponsor of the bill that passed in a bipartisan vote out of the Senate, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill. The House Republican leadership would not take it up, and if you followed that debate at all, a couple of House Republicans who were in tough districts that are either heavily Hispanic or rely on Latino labor, they got involved and made a big push, and they did what's called a discharge petition. And a discharge petition is a rule in the Congress, in the House. If 218 people sign a discharge petition, the legislation is required by law to be taken up for a vote. And part of the problem going on is the Republican leadership hasn't let us bring bills up for votes.
Right.
So you can circumvent that by doing the discharge petition. They got up to about 215, 216 signatures, and their leadership said, "Oh, don't do it. It's kind of an embarrassment for leadership if that happens. We'll work with you." And then the agreement they made was they were going to bring 3 immigration bills to the floor and do what's known as Queen of the Hill. So you bring 2 or 3 bills up, and you vote on all of them, and the one with the most votes goes to the Senate. Mm-hmm. And they were supposed to bring up the bipartisan bill that the Senate passed. They were going to bring up some draconian thing that Bob Goodlatte, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, cooked up. And then the third one was a bill an undisclosed bill that was the privilege of the Speaker. They ended up bringing up Goodlatte and the Speaker bill. They didn't bring up the bipartisan bill. All of them failed, and we're still stuck in the same place. So what the new Congress needs to do is take up comprehensive immigration reform, and the starting point, I would submit, would be the bill that passed the Senate with bipartisan support.
Start with that.
Pass it, send it over to the Senate, let them do their work.
Mm-hmm. And so, looking ahead, you have, I don't know, maybe rose-colored glasses. I don't know about this idea for bipartisanship going forward. So tell us what you think is going to happen in the midterms.
Democrats are going to win the House, 33 seats.
What makes you so sure?
Voter motivation. Couple things. There's a couple things. One, I've never seen the electorate as motivated as it is. And we'll go back to the week after the last election. I had constituents, myself, my wife included, ripping our hair out by the roots. I mean, it was a tough time. People were calling me, "What do we do? How do we get involved? Do I move to Canada? Do I move to Mexico? Should I apply for dual citizenship in Italy?" And so I immediately organized a number of town hall meetings in different parts of the district. The first one was in St. Helena with a friend of mine who owns a winery over there, was a former ambassador to Austria, and she was one of the first people that called me, and we did it at her winery. We figured we'd get a few people there. We had about 250 people show up. Next one I did was in Santa Rosa. We had about 250, 300 people show up. Did one in Vallejo, did one in Martinez, the same thing. Did one in Lake County and had 150 people show
what
up.
do you hear from your colleagues, though, that are not in such blue areas to begin with, right?
Oh, believe me, I know all about that.
I know,
Yeah.
that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Tell us.
So what I'm telling you is the motivation was incredible. And across the country, we're seeing the same type of motivation. I had town hall meetings that weren't related to after the election where I had to turn people away. We had overflow rooms, and I was live streaming. Mike McGuire and I had one on healthcare. I had 1,100 people at Pioneer High School. And my colleagues are experiencing the same type of motivation. And another way you can gauge motivation is if you look at our candidates, we've got we have too many seats in play on the Democratic side of the aisle. We have too many Democrats who are viable candidates. We can't afford them all, bottom line. And if you look at the quality of the candidates, another way to determine, you've got people who have been successful in other walks of life, maybe military, business, nonprofit, other levels of government, who have come out and said, I've had it, this is terrible, I'm running for office. I'm hanging everything up, I'm postponing everything, I'm running for office. Mm-hmm. I have never seen a collection of qualified candidates like this before in my life. Then you look at the money that they're raising. These guys are raising $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. And people don't just willy-nilly donate money. They've got to. That means that the folks who are running for those seats have a motivated constituency to be able to. Absolutely. Yeah. So and then the other thing you look at is the handicappers, the people who are in the business of analyzing races and ranking them as to the likelihood that they'll stay the same or flip. About every 2 or 3 days, they do another round of analysis, and one came out today. They analyze 6 seats in the country, and of the 6 seats, 4 of them went decidedly Democratic, and one of them went undecidedly Republican, and went from tilt Republican to lean Republican, which is no big deal. One went from lean Democrat to toss-up. So those are the two that the Republicans
a little more nebulous.
Benefit. Yeah. But the other ones, they went either lean Democrat to sure thing, or toss up to lean, a real substantial move. So we're seeing this all over.
Yeah, I mean it's good to see that there are new candidates involved, right? There are new people stepping up. And I think part of that is, it's the issues, right? And one issue that we've talked about and that we're curious to get your take on is, do you think Roe versus Wade is in jeopardy now that Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court?
I do, and I don't know the extent of the jeopardy yet. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's going to be, I guess, I didn't watch all the hearings. I at work, I had committee hearings and on the floor voting, but I watched as much of it as I could. Mm-hmm. And going into it, my thought was that it was at risk, but probably at risk of being kicked down to a state issue. What I saw from that dais when he was being questioned, I've changed my mind. I think well, he did something that was unbelievable to me. He got very angry, which I think should have been a sign that he doesn't have the judicial temperament to be on any bench, let alone the Supreme Court. But he became very partisan. I don't know if you saw the part where he said, the Clintons.
Oh, I did.
And so this guy was real. He was vindictive, and it came real clear. So I feel Roe v. Wade is more in danger than I originally thought it was.
And so talk a little bit about, you say, kicking it down to the state, because Roe versus Wade is somewhat of a nuanced decision in a sense. You know, it's if at the federal level abortion was not available, what could California do to protect that right for women in the state?
Well, I don't think you're going to see states like California or New York roll over. There'll be challenges. There'll be legislative. They'll try and address it legislatively. I've taken 1 million votes on Roe v. Wade, and back in the early days, many of them were thought to be unconstitutional, and probably pushed on the constitutionality until the court opined otherwise.
Yeah.
Norma McCorvey, you know who she is?
I don't, but I feel like I should.
Yeah, she was
Tell me.
Roe or Wade, one of the two. She was the plaintiff in that. And when I first ran for office, when I ran for the state senate, she came to Chico. That was part of our district then, and did an event for me. And as you know, she flipped and went the other way.
Yes, that's right.
But I told the woman who had set it up, was a county supervisor in San Francisco, and after the event I said, "You better watch her." I said, I'm not sure how with us she is."
Right.
And it was months later she flipped.
You felt it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Your comments on Kavanaugh's demeanor overall were interesting because, of course, there's the phrase "sober as a judge."
No more.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So another big issue here.
Well, and the other thing is, I mentioned earlier that I'm a staunch supporter of the integrity of our government.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gives us the democracy that we have, and that hearing process was a 3-ring circus. And for him to lash out at members who were doing their job is to review and vote on the confirmation of judges. And when they were asking him questions, for him to be as snarky as he was, and criticizing people, asking people that had a drinking problem, and that was beneath the demeanor of anyone seeking to do anything in public office.
So we're going to pivot a little bit. I don't have a great transition, but we don't have that much time, so we'll just get to it. You're here visiting us today on a campus, and we know that campuses, whether they're middle school or high school or college or even corporate campuses, are increasingly targets for gun violence. And so we want to know how you propose we reduce gun violence, and we know you're the chair of the House Gun Violence Task Force, and so we'd like to hear more about the goings on there and what you think should be done.
Yeah, I'm after Sandy Hook, I was the person appointed by Leader Pelosi to take this issue on, and I've worked on it probably every day since. And including today before I saw you, I was on the phone on a conference call at 7 o'clock this morning with John Feingold, who's Michael Bloomberg's campaign guy, talking strategy on how we proceed. We're both of the belief that the Democrats are going to win the House, and how we proceed after the November election. And we're still sorting through some of those ways. But the task force that I put together, I was made the chair, and then I was able to pick the members, and I tried to do. I tried to create a task force that was representative of not only the issue but of all sides of the issue. I thought we were on a more solid ground than ever before because of the Heller decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Heller decision, Heller sued the District of Columbia because of their rules that didn't allow people within the District of Columbia to own a handgun. And Heller won. And what the court said was, stop for a second. But before that, there was basically there were two extremes on the issue of guns. One that said Second Amendment says that anybody who wants any kind of gun should be able to have any kind of gun. Mm-hmm. And there are other people who said there shouldn't be any guns, notwithstanding the Second Amendment. Second Amendment said militia, muskets, and all that stuff. Well, Heller came in and sorted all that out, and Heller said, no, the Second Amendment says that you have a right to bear arms. You can own a gun. But there's also a provision for reasonable regulation of firearm ownership. And I thought after Sandy Hook, 21 kids murdered on a school campus, first graders and second graders. It was probably one of the worst things that I'd ever had to deal with in my life. And that and the Heller decision, I thought, this is going to be easy. We're going to go right down the middle, and we're going to come out with some reasonable regulations on gun ownership. And as you know, it wasn't easy. We could not even get a hearing in the House, let alone a vote in the House. I introduced legislation with Peter King out of New York, a Republican, that would, and it was the centerpiece. We have a whole report on all the things you could do to minimize gun violence, but the centerpiece was our bill that said that if you buy a gun through the commercial sale, you had to get a background check. And that took care of the people who said, hey, if my hunting buddy and I want to swap guns, we've known each other all of our lives, we should be able to do it. If my uncle wants to give me a gun, I should be able to do that. So we took it right to commercial sales. And the thought being that in a commercial sale, you don't know the person you're either buying from or selling to. And so you had to have a background check to buy that gun. The way the law works is the federal law sets a floor, sets a standard, and any gun sold through a licensed dealer any place in the United States has to go through a background check. But non-licensed dealers, some of whom are commercial, can sell firearms, and there's not that federal rule. Some states are more stringent. California says anybody who transfers a firearm, receives a firearm through transfer, has to get a background check. So I told you one of my kids is a cop.
Right.
If I give my kid, the cop, a gun, we have to go to a gun store, and he can lock up his cop car with a shotgun on the dashboard, walk in with a big iron on his hip, and before he can take that gun, he has to go through a background check and wait 10 days. Mm-hmm. Some states, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want to do. So we tried to close that loophole. So 6 years later, and not even a hearing.
Yeah.
And if you recall, with the help of my good friend and my colleague, John Lewis, we shut down the House for a day and a half. Yes. We had a protest on the House floor, and still no movement. My bill has, and don't quote me on this, but it'll be pretty close. I think I have 214 co-authors, and I think there are 11 of them that are Republicans. So it is a bipartisan bill.
So I'm thinking about numbers. No, I'm thinking about numbers for a discharge petition.
Yeah, 218.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
But just because, even if I had,
I'm doing some math over here.
But even. Don't confuse me with math.
Well, me neither. I'm in journalism, so it's not my...
They say when it comes to math, there's three kinds of people. Those who can do it and those who can't.
Yeah, pretty much.
But even with a discharge petition, so if I had 219 members who co-authored the bill, that's no guarantee that they'll all sign the discharge petition. Because remember what I said earlier, the leadership sees that as an embarrassment, as a challenge to their leadership. Okay. Yeah. So of the Republican members that I have on the bill, I don't suspect many of them, if any of them, would sign a discharge petition. Yeah. But the other thing I know, there's another 25 or 30 members in the House, in today's House, that if the bill came up for a vote, would vote on it. When I did a hostile amendment to an appropriations bill, adding $21 million to the background check program, because some jurisdictions don't have the money to participate in it, and so we upped the ante by $21 million. And as I say, it was a hostile amendment, and I got 70 Republicans to vote for that. So,
so the idea would be in the next session coming up, to?
We'll have a bill, and as I said, I think Democrats win the House, and it'll be one of the first bills we take up.
Okay.
I already have that assurance from the House Leader.
Okay, we'll see.
Soon to be House Speaker.
Well, we shall see, right? We shall see. All right, so let's see, what's next? So okay, we're gonna pivot a little bit again. Again? Well, we got a lot to do here, and your time is, our president has passed many comments about the press and about journalists, one of which is that journalists are the enemy of the people. I guess it's kind of related to violence, like we talked about before, but this is violence against a particular profession. And so, what's your take on it? And do you think there's anything that Congress can do to intervene in this ideology?
Well, I think this issue, amongst many others, are absolutely appalling. He has taken everything to a new low. He has made fun of people with disabilities. He has alienated just about every ethnicity. He is an appalling individual who wears it on his sleeve, and what he's done with the press. I said earlier that the institution of representative democracy is really important. It should be important to all of us. Mm-hmm. And if you take away the Fourth Estate, it's devastating to our democracy and to our future. People need to speak out against it. And I'm sure that you're frustrated about it, and I have a saying: don't be frustrated, don't get frustrated, get organized, and that's what will make the difference. And as I said, the first step is winning back the House, and that's that initial block to this character. And in 2020, then we need to focus on the White House, but. He's done some things that are. I hope all of you feel as upset about it and as demoralized. Not demoralized. Just as violated as I do.
Well, and I think it's particularly troublesome now that a journalist who wrote for the Washington Post was allegedly murdered and slaughtered inside the Turkish consulate by the Saudis, potentially. And the president has yet to really acknowledge what it seems like the intelligence community has come to accept, which is that the Saudi crown prince was behind it.
I think
and he's,
that
continuing with business as usual with the Saudis.
I think that when all is found out and all is said and done, you and I won't be a bit surprised, and this guy will be in complete denial. I mean,
I want to say what makes you say that, but I feel like that's...
You know what makes me say that?
Not really,
everything.
I know.
Everything that happens, he takes no responsibility for anything unless it's good stuff. Mm-hmm. And this guy, he takes credit. Some of the things he takes credit for is equal to the rooster taking credit for the sun coming up. I mean, he didn't do anything to bring about some of the good things that happened. But yesterday he said that well, if any Republicans lose, it's not my fault. If there was ever an election that was a referendum on a president, it's this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said over and over at his campaign events, a vote for X is a vote for me. That's been his kind of tagline for a number of different candidates. So we'll see. I mean, I guess if you could just talk a little bit about, the U.S. We like to claim the moral high ground. And it seems that with this incident that's happened, if we continue to conduct business as usual with the Saudis, if they have in fact done murder a journalist, which is supposedly anathema in the U.S., right, completely against who we are, then how does that affect us on the world stage? Well,
we're already affected on the world stage. Here's a situation where, pick your poison. I mean, here's somebody who's working with other countries to undermine our democracy, someone who, and I guess we'll find out what the extent of it is, and I certainly don't want to come out and say I know absolutely what happened, because I don't. But remember, I served 8 years on the Intelligence Committee, and I suspect there's folks in our government who know exactly what happened. And the way he is handling it, I think that he's already getting pushback from Republicans, his own party, and I think when all his investigations are done, if there's any truth to this, I think you're going to see big pushback from his party. But don't for a minute think that he stays where he is now. He'll shift gears like you've never seen before.
Yeah, he's done that before.
Yeah, that's his MO.
Yeah. Which maybe we'll see a little bit with the trade war. We wanted to ask you about that as well. Where do you think we stand on this? Well, I know, right? I mean, where do you think we stand now with China as it relates to trade? And how?
Well, we're in a trade war with China, and it's a trade war that's hurting everyday people. My old chief of staff, who was with me for years, is the president of a company in Napa County that sells wine to airlines and cruise ships and things like that. And he sent me a copy of an email that he received from a Chinese company he was doing business with. It said, "Please cancel our order because of the tariffs." Period. $130,000. Boom, shot. I can't tell you how many people, small business people, have come to me and said, "I just lost $30,000 order. I just lost a $300,000 order." There's a steel recycling company in Kentucky, and I met the man who owned it, and I think he owns 7 in 7 different countries, one of which is in Kentucky. When it happened, he said, immediately, he said, I had to shut one of them down. And he said it was the one in Kentucky, 135 jobs gone. And so
you think those voters in Kentucky will connect those dots? Because I would imagine Kentucky doesn't typically vote like Northern California does.
Well, let's wait and see what happens in that Andy Barr, Amy McGrath seat. That's going to be an interesting one. That's going to be an interesting one. For as journalists, you probably should watch that, because in that race, it's. Negative campaigning is always a controversial issue, and I'm sure you've studied this and thought about it, but you always have people that say, "Oh, I hate it when people say anything negative in a campaign," and I'll never vote for anybody who uses negative campaigning. And you hear candidates say, I'm the recipient of negative campaigning, or I won't use negative campaigning. But every cycle, what happens? There's negative campaigning that takes place, and the reason is it works. It works with the voters. Well, in this Kentucky race, Amy McGrath has said, "I'm not going there. I'm just not going to do it." And she was real clear with all of the outside funders and the folks that do independent expenditures, "Don't do any negative campaigning on my behalf. I don't want it. I will renounce it." And her opponent, the incumbent, is doubling down on the negative stuff. So that'll be an interesting one for you to watch. We'll see what happens. And it's an uphill battle for her anyway, but we'll see if it works.
So I have one question that's sort of big picture again, and then another local question maybe we'll wrap with. But so the big picture is, what do you see, or personally, what is the most important issue to you for this particular election cycle?
Well, I don't know if I can say one particular issue. I can tell you, without even thinking about it, the most satisfying and one of the very most important things about my job is being able to help people. And our offices help people that don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
And that's pretty special. We had a deal last year where there was a Vietnam veteran who had been homeless, living on the streets in Sonoma County for 10 years. Somebody brought him into our office. We got him into health care. We got his health care stuff taken care of, got him into transitional housing, and 2 years ago now, he is employed and married and has his own place now. That guy didn't even know who I was or where my office was. Somebody brought him in off the street. Had a woman who was behind on her rent, and her landlord called me and said, she tells me that Social Security is shortchanging her. And we feel sorry for her. We love her to death, but we can't keep subsidizing her. We've got a bank loan on this house. Sure enough, Social Security had been shortchanging her. She got a check for $92,000 in back pay. And that lady didn't know, who I was. People with developmental disabilities who are in trouble. We're like the last stop sometimes for people. So that's incredibly important. As far as the most important issues, we've already talked about a whole bunch of the most important issues. But if I had a wand and could wave it, I'd want to fix climate change, mental health, and drug abuse. And mental health and drug abuse are probably one and the same in many instances.
There's a connection there.
But that would certainly help solve a lot of problems, and a lot of things are tied to that. And it doesn't. And by me, if we can't fix climate change, probably forget it. I mean, there's that is such a serious issue. But there's so many other things. You talked about the cost of living in Sonoma County, the cost of housing in any place, and then you look at us in Sonoma County. The October fires burned down 5% of our housing stock, and we were already short of housing.
Yeah.
So and that if we can't get that fixed quickly, that's going to have an impact on our community like you couldn't even imagine, because what we're losing, people who don't have homes are the nuts and bolts, the heart and soul of our community. They're teachers, they're nurses, they're winery workers, they're all the people that make it go around and round. And if they don't have a place to live, we're in trouble.
Nothing else matters, yeah.
And Sonoma County is a pretty marvelous place, and you start ripping the heart and soul out of marvelous places, and it's bad.
Yeah. So my last question was about the fires. So you're pretty good. But what do you see?
You want to know what I did on those fires?
Well, no. I mean,
do
yeah.
I get
I kind of want to know what the no. Maybe after. I mean, I think none of these are really that challenging. But what do you see as the federal government's role in helping Sonoma County recover, and what do you think of the administration's response to the fires here?
Well, you're going to let me answer my question. That's good. The federal government's response was resource distribution to our area and to any area that has a natural disaster. So I worked with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and that was a struggle because the Republicans made our fires in October a real partisan issue for a couple of ways. One, they wouldn't sign the letter that Senator Feinstein and I did to get resources, and I had to get real nasty and political to make it happen. Second, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and that terrible tax bill that they did took away our ability to claim casualty losses for natural disasters. And I raised, and it's probably on the YouTube someplace, but I raised a stink that I'm very, very proud of in committee, and we were able to get our casualty loss stuff mitigated to some degree. But probably the biggest thing was the federal government has the ability to either do a 75-25 funding match for response or a 90-10 funding match for response. And I was able to put together a bipartisan coalition to get the 90-10. And that was huge. And we got $215 million for community block grants as well, which was important. As far as the administration's response, I got to give them a high grade.
Yeah.
And I work closely with FEMA, and I have for a long time, because I've represented just about all of Northern California at one time or another. So we've had earthquakes, we've had fires, we've had floods. I used to represent Humboldt County. We had a huge earthquake up there. I used to represent West County. We've had huge floods out there. Earthquake in Napa 4 years ago. Fires in Lake County, Sonoma, and Napa County. And so I've worked with them a lot. My office, and I'll take, the only credit I'll take for this is I hire really good people to represent us. But we put together a pamphlet, if there's a disaster, what you need to do. That it was so well done, excuse me, that other offices use that now if they have a disaster. So we had that. We worked, as I say, closely with FEMA. Cal OES took my pamphlet and said, we're going to duplicate this at the state level. And Bob Fenton, who is the FEMA administrator for our area, and I are personal friends. So I don't think any of that was lost in this, but the administration came through.
Yeah. It's interesting because, it's good to hear you say that, I guess, because a lot of, I guess what we felt here was that the president in particular, not FEMA, but the White House per se, didn't necessarily provide attention to the fires here, we felt, in the same way he did to other disasters that happened in states that were maybe more favorable to him overall.
Well, look at it this way.
If the optics around that are wrong.
Look at it this way. We've had fires for 4 years now in California, tragic fires, and not just in Democratic areas, not just in Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake, but we've had them up in Shasta County. We had them down in Mimi Walder's district in Southern California. He's not been out here at all. He's been to Montana 3 times to campaign against John Tester.
He's there today.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. All right, so that was the slate of questions that we had, and it looks like I think we have a couple. I'm kind of seeing some Q&A here. So, do you want me to roll with this one, Ann, or do you want to pose the question?
Let's open it up to the class.
Actually, Ian,
I can't hear you.
I don't know.
Let's open it up to the class for
Sure.
a few questions.
Definitely.
I have one quick question. There are Republicans who disagree with a lot of his rhetoric and what he says, but they won't stand up to him because they want the political gain, the conservative judges, the Supreme Court justice, the tax cuts. If the political wind shift, we know he's not ideologically set. If the political winds shift and the Democrats take over, I could see him actually starting to engage with Democrats in a similar way. I mean, are the Democrats still going to try for impeachment? Are they? I mean, what's the plan? Once the Democrats take over the House, and possibly, I guess 538 gives it like a 1 in 6 chance of taking over the Senate.
Well, let me tell you, if when we win in November, if we come out of the gate and say, we're going to impeach this guy and we're going to raise your taxes, we'll be real lucky if we can keep that majority for the 2 years.
Yeah.
We better be reasonable. We better be measured. And I think what happens with the Mueller investigation will determine what happens with impeachment. He needs to be able to do his work. Once he completes his work and submits that work to the Congress, then it's Congress's responsibility to analyze it and share it with the American public and do whatever it is that we feel is appropriate. Thank you.
Marika, you had a question?
Let's see, do the Democrats have any strategies or thoughts on how to make sure that voter suppression for blacks in Georgia and Native Americans in North Dakota doesn't change the results? of the upcoming midterm elections?
Yeah, Democrats are all over that, and we're working. I think the National Party is working closely with the state parties. Don't think that there's not going to be attempts to suppress the votes, and it's not just in Georgia and North Dakota. It's everywhere. I remember when in California there was a guy, matter of fact, he was speaker for a very short period of time. Kurt Pringle was a Southern California assemblyman and was the Republican leader, and he had a challenge, and he had a part of his district was largely Latino. He went out and hired private uniformed security guards. He hired one for every polling place to go stand by it. And you know what that did? That turned down, just because you're here legally, just because you're eligible to vote, if you're Latino in one of those areas and you come up and there's a uniformed person there, that automatically discourages some people from trying to, come forward and vote. We had, when I ran in '93, I think it was, in a special election, I got redistricted midterm, and I had to run in a special election, and my district shifted from, I was first elected to the state senate to represent Sonoma, Napa, Lake, Colusa, Glenn, Butte, Tehama, and Shasta County. Right after I was elected, they did redistricting, and the district changed. So my new district was Lake, Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, Solano, Mendocino, Humboldt, and Del Norte. And so I had to run in that special election. The woman that ran against me, the Republican that ran against me, they spent tens of thousands of dollars, and their whole pitch was, he's already a state senator in another district. He just wants to move into our district. So if you're a Democrat, don't go vote. Voter suppression. And we should be trying everything we can to get people out to vote.
But are they going to get away with this?
I don't know.
Without anything happening?
No, not without anything happening. As I say, the Democrats are engaged in this. Local parties, state parties, and the national party. They're out in force. Now, do they do something that circumvents our defensive strategy? Possibly. Talk to me after the election, but it's not because we're not trying.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Anybody else?
Other questions?
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the housing crisis in California?
It's, as I said earlier, it's a real issue, exacerbated in our area by the fires, but just the cost of housing is incredible, and the lack of federal support for affordable housing is a problem. And when they cut back and they change the tax laws to make it more difficult for people to build affordable housing, it creates a bigger problem than it has to be, and we need to fix that stuff. And the tax stuff is something that we'll take on in my committee when we win the majority.
So, given what you say the Republicans are doing to have people go out and vote Republican, what are the Democrats
To do what?
To have people go out and vote Republican? What are the Democrats doing to combat that?
Well, we have our own, voter registration and ground operations going. Every candidate is going to do their program, their way. But on the House seats, we've got regional individuals, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the federal committee that deals with the House seats. We've got regional managers around the country, and we're working with people to have a good ground game. That ground game is the whole ball of wax. We've got to get people turned out to vote.
And how do you do that?
Well, every one of you have to promise me that you're going to bring somebody to the polls. I was doing a speech the other day, and with me on the podium was John Tudor, the Registrar of Voters in Napa County, and he said something interesting. He said, "I'm deputizing all of you ambassadors for the Registrar of Voters, and get on. And you all can do this. You can get on your social media. You can go out. You can let everybody know, all your family, all your friends, all your, relatives. Let them know that the deadline is coming up. It's important for them to register to vote, and then you can turn around and on election day make sure they vote. And in California, we've got the largely mail-in ballots now, so people already have their ballots. So make sure, give them a shot on the social media. Tell them, hey, get it done. Get it done, get it mailed in.
Any chance you think we'll see a surprise and the Democrats would take the Senate too? I know it's 5:30, it says it's 1 in 5 or 20% chance. I'm just wondering your take with what you're saying about the money and all the things that Democrats have going
The engagement.
right now. The enthusiasm.
I don't know. Things have changed. I would have thought that Joe Donnelly in Indiana and Bill Nelson in Florida, if you'd asked me 3 months ago, I would have bet against them winning. But it looks like both of them are going to win now. I think that we win. I think Jackie Rosen wins that seat in Nevada. I just sent a bus to Nevada last weekend. 55 people from our district went over and door knocked for Jackie, and they came back and they were pretty happy with the results. The seat in Arizona, Cinema McSally, I think that Cinema has an excellent chance of winning that. And the numbers I saw today on Tester are good. He's 10 points up on that the other crew cut guy.
Rosenberg?
I don't know what his name is.
He's from Jersey.
Yeah.
He's from Jersey.
But that's not out of the ordinary. The guy that I serve with in the House, I'll think of his name in a second, the House member from Montana, he's from New York.
Oh, really?
And high-tech guy moved to Bozeman, Montana, built a gazillion-dollar house and a company, and
Wants to be Teddy Roosevelt from New York, hanging out, yes.
yeah. He's the guy that punched the reporter, remember?
Of course.
Oh, right.
Of course.
Yeah.
He clocked him.
Right.
Yeah.
And he got elected anyway.
Yeah.
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 Paid $5,000 to an anger management group or something.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What about North Dakota and Texas?
Heidi
Heitkamp and Beto.
Well, Beto O'Rourke could really, if we woke up on the day after election and they said Beto won, I don't think I'd be surprised. I'd be extremely happy. But he could be the dark horse. It doesn't look great right now. It looks like he's slipping. Heidi, I guess I would have said 3 months ago, I would have said you can't beat Heidi. She's going to win. But that's changed a lot. She has a much tougher race than what we had originally thought. And then she voted against Kavanaugh, and they say that hurt her. I don't know. I'm real glad she did. She's a personal friend of mine. She and I've been trying to get her to get on my gun stuff, and she's from a tough state for that, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get her there. Her husband is quite an outdoorsman, so probably about 3 times a year, I'll get a phone call from Heidi, and she'll say, "Mike, I'm bringing down some pheasant and some walleye, so you get 3 House members, I'll get 3 senators, and you can cook it at your house." I love to cook.
And you bring the wine, I imagine.
There's always some wine there, except she drinks beer.
Ah, okay.
So I always have some beer for her. But
We have that here too in Sonoma.
but it's great. She'll bring over 2 or 3 senators, and I'll bring 2 or 3 House members, and it just gives you an opportunity to meet and talk and discuss issues. And she's really a nice person, and she's tough. She's Montana tough, and she'll tell you in no uncertain terms. And so it'll be tragic if she loses. And I serve with the guy that's running against her, and he's no box of chocolates.
Okay, any last questions?
Right here.
I think Attila
I
has
just want to know
one.
your thoughts on Prop 6.
On Prop?
Prop 6 to,
Oh, the gas tax?
Yeah.
Oh, you should vote against Prop 6.
yeah, no
Right,
on
no.
it.
Yeah, no on 6. What Prop 6 does is repeals the state gasoline tax that is used to, to fix our infrastructure. So vote no on it unless you know something that I don't know. If you know for a fact that you can pave roads with fairy dust, then don't worry about money to pay for it. But I don't think you can. So I think we need those resources to get our infrastructure up into shape.
One last note.
Yeah, go, and I have one last one.
Okay. I read today that there are some Republicans that are complaining that Trump is building this enormous war chest, but refusing to share any of it with Republicans that are struggling in their local races. And you mentioned that you sent a bus to help another Democrat in another state. So do you think there's responsibility to cross state lines to help someone of your party, or to even, say executive branch should be helping the legislative branch?
Well, I can
Josh?
tell you, as a member of the Democratic caucus, I'm assessed dues every year that goes to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Dues is assessed in part by your committee assignments, and I'm on an exclusive committee. I'm on Ways and Means Committee, the most important committee in Congress, and I have a pretty healthy dues assessment, and I do my dues plus at least half again as much every year. In addition to that, I donate money to like-minded colleagues and to us that under his command, FEMA was doing the best job they've ever done, and everything was fantastic. And somebody raised a specific issue, and he said, well, let's remember one thing. He said, as good as our people are, remember, Puerto Rico is an island.
That's right.
And jaws hit the table. And he said, and it's in the middle of the ocean. And the ocean's really big.
Oh my God.
And there were 3 cabinet secretaries, the vice president, and 15 members of Congress. And all of us were, we couldn't believe that he said that. So that wasn't just a comic skit. He actually said it. The other meeting I was with, it was a Wounded Warriors deal in the White House, where I was invited over, and notwithstanding the fact that I don't want to be around them a lot, I'd walk to the gates of hell for Wounded Warriors. They put everything on the line, and if I could help them, I would. And so I was there for them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks very much. You're tough. You're tough. Thank you. Good luck in school. We're expecting big things out of all of you.